He is the only man I've ever known to face down the actual Inquisition, the holy office of the Roman Catholic Church, who were looking, in fact, for him specifically, or at least trying to unmask the true identity of Xavier Rynne. Beginning in 1962 and continuing for years, articles had appeared under that pseudonym in The New Yorker, reporting from the inside of the Second Vatican Council. But he was more than just the New Yorker's man, the correspondent at the Vatican. He was also a window for the laity and the greater public into the church, and his writings did much to inform our perceptions of it, even to this day, a subject to which I will return. They played a role, too, at the time in the maneuverings over the legacy of Pope John XXIII and the ambitions and interests of the Curia. He was also a family friend. Some combination of equivocation, casuistry, intimidation, and just dumb luck kept him from being officially caught or punished, though he did unmask himself some 36 years later, in part because he became convinced that if he went to the grave with this secret, the Jesuits would surely claim him as one of their own. Which he was not. He was a Redemptorist, an order founded around laboring with the country poor and having a kind of social justice vocation. That his real name was Frank Murphy was among the worst-kept secrets of the Irish Bronx, where his father had been a cop and his mother a hotel worker on the Grand Concourse. 63 years now since that first article and encounter with the Inquisition, another American, a pope, is now the center of interest at the Vatican. So naturally, my thoughts turned back to Xavier Rynne and his legacy. When asked, my mother told me she remembered him as a kind of faker, a phony who was full of himself and often with his hand out. He had asked her to get him a commentating job at a major broadcaster in the 1980s. All this should be taken with a grain of salt, since he was always better friends with her sister, who has ever been my mother's most ancient enemy. But I share it because my mother's almost congenital instinct to be deflating of pretension is a useful anecdote to the way I see coverage of popes and prelates at these important junctures, almost as excessively adulatory as the coverage of China's party leadership, at least in my opinion. And that's not to say that you can't do so without being even-handed. She also told me that John XXIII, while he may have been both disgustingly fat and exceptionally ugly, was indeed a good pope. But what of his legacy? Xavier Rynne's, I mean. Remember, guys, this is not my area, so I'm no expert, but it strikes me that in his coverage of the Church and of Vatican II, as powerful and persuasive as it was, it may have done a fundamental disservice in its very framing, in staking out an analytical framework of liberals and conservatives. Are those really the most meaningful categories? I ask this now because I see the very same frame being applied in America to academia by the Trump administration as well as its opponents. The way a professor votes, I would submit, tells you really nothing about how or what the knowledge is that they create. And probably everyone can accept that for people in the sciences. But it's equally true in a field like history, where relative positions, left or right, are not really meaningful the way, for example, methodology or even chronology might be. The general public has been trained to think this way, I think, for understandable reasons in the way that politics are covered, but the application to other fields are just really dubious. Are these categories helpful for understanding the Roman Catholic Church? And I invite people who know more to jump in, but we could just as easily divide things differently. For example, the relative interest in the theology or doctrine versus an emphasis on the pastoral mission. From that point of view, Pope Francis, for example, would doctrinally have changed really nothing at all, but have been deeply pastorally engaged. Not a liberal, in other words. Chinese politics, I think, often works this way too. But are there important areas or institutions where you think the kind of liberal, conservative, left-right frame of analysis is actually orthogonal or counterproductive to understanding what's really going on? I would be curious to hear. And remember, this is all just one man's opinion. And so let this be a sursum corda of sorts, not to God, but to a wayward kind of father who may have led all the world just a little bit astray.